All right, this video is for the purpose of clarifying how chords work. And as you can see on the screen, we have all 12 major scales up. Another word for major scales are diatonic scales. And diatonic scales are just a fancy name for what we know as the major scale. We've heard this scale our whole lives because many children's songs are made directly from the major scale itself, like "Twinkle Twinkle Little Star." It's just ABC song. Nursery rhymes. The Christmas song "Joy to the World" is the diatonic scale played backwards. Our culture, our Western culture, is so deeply entrenched in the diatonic scale because it's what we've heard our entire lives. And it's derived from what is called the chromatic scale. The chromatic scale is just every single note in our culture of music just played back to back or sequentially. And there's 12 of those. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then you're back to where you started again. Another name for the chromatic scale is the equally tempered, or the equal tempered, I guess, semitone scale. It's called a semitone because the relationship between the notes in a chromatic scale are called half steps. Half steps. So the distance between a C and a C sharp, for example, is 1/2 step. Very arbitrary. It was just determined. And I don't really know exactly the origin, but just think of it this way. The distance between a note and then its note that's an octave higher, so let's just say C to C. There's science behind this. Like let's just say a guitar string. If you cut a guitar string in half, then it's the same pitch but an octave higher. So it has to do with halving frequencies or doubling frequencies. You end up either an octave higher than that pitch or an octave lower than that pitch if you double the length of the string or you half the length of a string. So it has to do with the actual science of vibrations per second. Okay. All right. So at some point in time in music history, and we'll say specifically in the Western culture, it had to be determined or decided how this space of one octave would be divided, like pieces of a cake. Mm-hmm. And it was determined that 12 was the number, that this octave space, this piece of cake, would be divided 12 times. Right. And that's where we came up with the equal tempered scale. And it's called equal tempered because those slices are exactly the same size. Okay, so songs are written from those notes, but the problem is there's not a really good harmonic relationship between these 12 notes. So if we just kind of put them together and try to build a song from them, it sounds kind of random. It doesn't have a lot of musicality. Yeah. So that's where this scale comes in that's on the screen, known as the diatonic scale. So instead of having half, all these slices of cake that are exactly the same size, it was determined that if you take some slices of cake that are bigger and mix them with the slices of cake that are smaller, you have a group of notes that really do work nicely together. And I don't know if you remember the formula. It's whole, bigger slices. Whole, whole, half. Whole, 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 half. So let's experiment with that. Let's take some bigger slices and put some smaller slices together. We'll mix them together and see what we come up with. So we'll just randomly choose one of these chromatic pitches and start from there. We won't be so random. We're going to choose C because it's a good note to start with. So C. So our first thing we need is a whole step. So we need a whole step from C. We're going to put two halves together to make a whole. Right? Then we need another whole. Then we need a half. And then a whole. And then another whole. And another whole. And then a half. Now, as you can see, when the layout of the piano was invented, it's not a coincidence that the white keys here, and I think they were black back in the day. I'm not sure when they flipped or whatever. The idea of is there's a contrast between these two sets, so that you can tell the difference between the two. Right. So this bottom layer is representative of one particular key. It's a very American thing, by the way, to assign these letters of C and D and E. That's specifically an American thing. It's a European thing to assign what's called solfeggio to these notes, like do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. But I don't know when the American system decided to assign letter names to this, but we could look all that up. I'm not the greatest music historian, as you can see, so I'm just more understand the relationship of the pitches and how that works. So, but the white keys sequentially represent the key of C, as we know the key of C. So now listen what happens, since we know that these notes do have a strong harmonic relationship. If I do that same example of just like randomly putting notes together, but I do that with just the white keys, key of C, these now what was sounding extremely random is going to have some musicality all of a sudden. And I am going to play randomly. I'm not going to try to do anything terribly musical right now, okay? Notice it has a better blend. Sure, even though it still sounds like I'm not being very mindful. I'm just putting notes together. Right. But it sure doesn't have that dissonant quality that the other one has. Right. Okay, so now we have a palette to work from to write music. So within this scale is everything that we need to write a song. Not only is there melodic quality or melodic notes to choose from, there's also harmonic notes to choose from, meaning that not only will we find the notes in here, we're going to find the chords in here. So let's just pick a song. Just randomly choose a song, and I could demonstrate for you. Anything. It could be one of the songs we just talked about. Somewhere out there. Oh, no. What was the other one? A Whole New World. Okay. Let's see. So the original key on that, and then I have to transpose it to C. So here's the melody, right? So I'm confining myself to the white keys. I'm going to plunk out the melody. All right, so that was all white keys. So the melody's there for me. And the chords are too. Ba 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 ba. Ba da ba da ba ba ba. Ba da ba da da ba da. Ba da ba da 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 da. Ba ba da da. Ba da 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 da. Da 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 da. Ba da da da. Ba da da da. Ba da ba da da. Kind of obviously simplified version, but you see, like it was all there for me. So instead of having this overwhelming number of notes to choose from, it would be such a daunting task to try to fish around for the melody with all of these 12 notes as my palette. I only had 7 notes as my palette. And it's much easier. Plus you're in an environment where all the notes make sense with each other. And I'm referring to the chord, like to the scale, as my environment to work in. It's like if you're doing a job, a project, a home project, and the project is you're, you're hanging a door. So what do you need? You need a chisel, you need a screwdriver, you need a drill, just this one size drill bit, and you just confine yourself to the tools that you need for the job, right? But what if like someone threw you like a 5 gallon bucket of joint compound, and a plane. Well, I guess you would need a plane, but my point is, right now you have all these tools. It's like an overwhelming task. Like, wait, I don't need all these tools. You don't need all this. So by knowing what key you're in, it makes the job easier. So how does that relate to this video of chords, of learning how chords work? Well, it does. It relates perfectly to this because you're going to run into situations where you're going to have to know how to build a chord and how that works. We're going to start by understanding how you can find pretty much the chords that you need right within the scale of the key that you're in. We're going to start there. So we're going to stay in the key of C for now. So take a look at your screen there, and you'll see that we have the key of C, and I'm just gonna highlight the key of C so you can just kind of focus on that right now. If you just take every other note, starting with the first note C, and then you move over 2 notes to E, and then move over 2 notes to G, well, that's your C chord. Now, the next chord that's in the key of C, that's valid in the key of C, you do the same thing. You just move your hand over and then take every other note. The second note, the fourth note, and the sixth note. And that's a D minor chord. That's the second chord, or the 2 chord, as it's commonly referred to, the 2 chord that's valid in the key of C. So root chord, 2 chord, D minor. Do the same thing. Move to the next chord, the 3 chord, E, G, B. That's an E minor. That's the 3 chord. And then do it again. F, A, C. That's the 4 chord. That's an F major chord. Do it again. Now we're going to spill off the page. Just know that we're going to spill off the page. In fact, what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually, just so it doesn't get too confusing, I'm going to cut off the end of this page here so we don't have this redundancy. So now you'll see kind of how it starts over again. So now we have G. So now let's just count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're at the 5th scale degree G. And we do every other note, G, B, D. So you see how it spilled off the page, but it's cyclical, or it cycles back to the beginning of the scale. We're together on this, right? G, B, D. That's the 5 chord. G major chord. Now keep moving forward. We're at the 6th scale degree now. A, C, E. That's an A minor chord. Now keep moving. We're at the 7th scale degree now. B, D. Again, just every other note. B, D, and F. That one may not look extremely familiar to you. It's not a B major and it's not a B minor. It's a B diminished chord. And then if you do it again, you're back where you started. Okay, so I'm gonna actually type these in real time for you because I want you to understand these rules. Every chord has every scale has a set of rules that goes with it in terms of what is known as the chord quality. You may not have heard this term before, chord quality, but I would like you to memorize these if possible. So I'm going to move this over. This is pretty easy to memorize. I'm just going to plant this right here. All right, so the first chord is always major. The second chord is minor. The third chord is also minor. The fourth chord is major. The fifth chord is major. The sixth chord is minor. The seventh chord is diminished. And that's it. Then you're back to where you were. So the next chord, of course, would be the root chord again, the octave. So just remember, major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished. But it's evident in the scale if you look at the C scale because it's the easiest scale on the piano visually. It reveals itself. C major, you can hear it, it's a happy sound. Minor has a sad sound. Minor. Major. Major. Minor. Diminished. And then back to where you started. Major. Now this is just touching on things because there's another thing that you need to know. This is just explaining how the chords within a key work. But what if you're not thinking about the key that you're in and you just randomly encounter a chord on a chord chart and you just need to know how to make the chord? So this is going to be very useful to you. This is the next thing that you need to know. So we're going to no longer highlight the C scale because now we're just going to kind of look at all of the scales as an even playing field, and we're going to use them as a reference. What you'll need to understand is the rules behind how to create a chord. So the basic rule for a major chord is to take the root, the third, and the fifth, and to put them together, and that gives you a major chord. Mm-hmm. All right, so root, third, and fifth in any one of those keys is going to give you a major chord. So if you see on a chord chart, A, just the letter A, that's implied that it's major. If it doesn't say minor, it's implied that it's major. And if you were to forget, wait, how do you make an A major chord? Well, you just look at your scale sheet, and it's right there at the top. Take your first note, your A, your third note, your C sharp, and your fifth note, your E, and you put them together, and there's your A chord. And it's going to work with every one of those scales. So I'm going to play all 12 chords there. That's A, Now, what about when you get into more difficult things? Well, we won't step into those quite yet. Let's just talk about the minor chord. Do you remember the rule to make a minor chord? You flat the third. You flat the third. Okay, so here are all our thirds right here. Our row of thirds is right here. So we would just have to flat that row to make our minor chords. So A minor would be A C natural, because if you flat a C sharp, it becomes a C natural. All of a sudden, this exercise sounds sad. A minor, B flat minor, B minor, C minor, D flat minor, D minor, E flat minor, E minor, F minor, F sharp minor, G minor, A flat minor. And there's all 12 minor keys. And you do realize that there are equivalent names for some of these keys. So, of course, E flat minor could also be called D sharp minor. I did not get into that because some of these chords are very uncommon. You won't see those names very often, so I just didn't get into them. All right, so now it's time to get into some of the other chords that you will see that you're going to need to know how to make them, and you will have a printout of these sheets. You will have a printout of these, I promise. You will not have to look at the video, but this is your holy grail of how to make your chords. But you're gonna have to ping pong between these two sheets to kind of cross reference one over the other. We have major and minor covered. So we're going to start with the seventh chord right here. So remember that it's implied that you're always going to have you understand already that you have to have your root, your third, and your fifth in there. Right. It's also implied that if it doesn't specify that it's a minor chord, if it doesn't specify that it's major, it's going to be major. Right. Okay. So the seventh chord also has that same a kind of implied situation that if it doesn't tell you what kind of seventh that it's using, that it's going to be the flatted seventh. And the reason why you just kind of instinctively said that it's major, it's a different implication because you would have clashing terminology if it was implied that it was major. So it's actually helpful that it's implied that the chord quality, remember the term chord quality means whether the chord itself is major or minor. Like whether it has a flatted third or a regular third, that's the term chord quality. Then where you get into the confusing terminology is that you have major sevenths and then you have flatted sevenths. So if you see a chord that says major seventh, which seventh do you use? Well, or does that word, here's the question is, does the term major in that chord refer to the chord being major? The answer is no, because we already clarified that it will never have to be said that a chord is major. Right. It's always implied. So therefore, you can make the safe determination that the word major in that chord is going to refer to the seventh. So therefore, if the word major is not used in the seventh chord, then you could also safely conclude that the seventh that's being called for is the flatted seventh. That's potentially confusing, right? This is a source of confusion for a lot of people. So here I'm going to bring some text back up on the screen here so I could show you how a like a C7th chord would be written. It would simply look like this. It would just look like this. C7, just like that. That's what it would look like on your paper. And you would play that chord like this. So if I return to the C scales here for a second, take a look at your C scale. To play that C7 chord, we take the C, the major third, because it didn't call for a minor, the fifth, and the flatted seventh, which is a B flat. And the reason why we're using the B flat is because it didn't say major seven. So we have to use the flatted seventh. So that's how you play that chord. So if we go back now to our rule sheet, the next chord that it's asking for is a minor seventh chord. And that would look like this. If you look at your screen, it just look like this. So the rule for a minor seventh chord is you flat the third, right? Because the rule is, since it's implied that the chord is major, if it does have that lowercase m, now you do have to flat the third. Has nothing to do with the seven. The little m in that chord name has nothing to do with the seventh. It has to do with the third. The seventh is controlled by the word major, and only by the word major. And we know that because in chord naming world, the word major does not control the chord, because that's always implied. It seems to me like they could have come up with a better way of naming these chords, because this is potentially confusing. All right, so you flat the third, and you add that same seventh. Right? Does that make sense? Because it's the flatted seventh, because it didn't call for the major seventh. And that's that chord. The next chord on the list is the major seventh. Okay, so that one would be written like this. C major seventh. So we know that the word major in that chord has nothing to do with the chord quality. However, we know that it's a major chord because it didn't say minor. Right. But we also know that we have to use the different seventh, because it asks for the different seventh. It's asking for the major seventh. So it's the seventh right out of the scale. If I go back to the scale sheet and you count to the seventh one, it's a B natural. So, and here's the chord that kind of like really seals the deal. The next one on the list is C minor. Oh, did I not put it on there? I can't believe I didn't put it on. C minor major. Oh, I did put it on there. Good. Okay. Minor major seventh, and that would just look like this. C minor major seventh. And so now this one really allows you to follow the logic. It's minor, it's specified as minor, so you have to flat the third, and then you add the major seventh. It's a very mysterious sounding chord, right? You hear it like in a spy movie or something. Do you follow the logic of that, though? Yeah. I want to make sure that you do. That's why I'm glad that you're here while we're making this video. Right. It's a minor because it has the word minor in it. Right. Because you never have to. The only time you would specify minor is if you want a minor chord. If you want a major chord, you don't have to do anything. If you want the major seventh, you have to ask for it. If you don't ask for it, it's always going to be the flatted seventh. So there was two deliberate actions in this chord. There were two deliberate actions. The minor chord quality was asked for, so you flatted the third, and the major seventh was asked for. Two deliberate actions were called for in this chord. Okay, good. I mean, it is confusing, but you'll get used to it. Okay. All right, the next chord on the list is, we're back into easy territory now. Now we have a C sixth. We just take the root, the third, and the fifth, and add the sixth. Right, and you can just see, we go back to the scale sheet, we see the sixth is just an A. We just literally count to the sixth scale degree, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and there's your sixth is your A. So that's an easy one. And you'll find that a lot of these are now pretty logical. C minor sixth, flat the third, and add the sixth. Next one on the list, diminished triad. Just follow the instructions. You flat the third, and you flat the fifth. Augmented chord. Oh, I should be showing you with these chords, how these chords would be written. Diminished would just be written like this. C diminished. And then augmented is written a couple of different ways. It could just be written like this. It could also be written with a plus sign. I see. You take the fifth and you raise it, or you sharp it. So here's your triad, C, E, G, and then you sharp the fifth. And here's the context that you would hear an augmented chord like. It's like a contextual thing. Yeah. Sus4. This chord is, people don't understand this chord a lot. Because, well, sometimes it's because they don't know what the sus is an abbreviation for. It's suspended. And then the other thing that people don't know what the suspended is referring to is also a source of confusion. Suspended, in this case, the suspended as in suspended like removed. So what's being removed, though, and this is where it's confusing, because of the way it's used in context, it sounds like we're suspending the fourth. But in actuality, we're suspending the third. But that's implied. It requires pre-existing knowledge to know that. And that's okay. Like in chord naming world, a lot of this is abbreviations. It's not like, sometimes it looks like chord names are just the recipe for building the chord, but there's missing information, right? So you don't know that major is always implied. You have to be told that. So here's another bit of pre-existing knowledge that you have to have, that the word suspended in a chord means that the third is removed and it's replaced with the fourth. So C sus4 would be written like this, and you would play it like this. You would take the third and you would replace it with the fourth. And it's one of those chords that generally is followed up with a resolve, and that resolve would be that you would bring the third back in. Because it's a chord that really kind of leaves you in this place of like unresolved. It's an unresolved feeling. And it feels nice when you bring it back. Now you would also just apply this very same logic with the sus2 chord. Sus2. You take the third, you suspend the third, and you replace it with the 2. Just to give you a refresher, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76, 77, 78, 79, 80, 81, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, 100, 101, 102, 103, 104, 105, 106, 107, 108, 109, 110, 111, 112, 113, 114, 115, 116, 117 we're going to bring up the C scale, and we're going to take a look at the C scale again. The fourth, of course, is the F. The 2 is the D. So let's go back. Here's your sus2. That's your Burt Bacharach chord. All right. Ninth chord. We're getting back a little bit into some confusing territory because now we're beyond 7 numbers. I just told you that a scale has 7 numbers. So why would we talk about ninths and 11ths and all this? Well, it's part of that abbreviation component that's in chord names. Why, and you may ask yourself, why are chord names abbreviated? Why is it necessary to abbreviate these chord names? And I'm going to give you a really easy answer. Because it's kind of understood that a lot of musicians are going to be sight reading. So you're going to put a chord chart in front of them at a gig. And there's simply not time to read a long chord name. So some of these chords are complicated, and they would require a very long name. Add the 9th, remove the 7th, or add the 9th, but add the 7th and the 9th, add the 13, add the 11th and the 9th and the 7th. Complicated. So by using these numbers, these higher numbers, they actually have a specific meaning. And I'm going to explain one right now. And actually, it's helpful that we just left off on this 2 chord. So there's another kind of 2 chord that's not a sus2. It would be called an add2 or just a C2. So if you see a chord that says C2, right, you would take a C chord, but it doesn't say sus, right? So you just take the C and you add the 2. Sometimes it's written as a C add 2. That's a very specific instruction, but you could kind of really shorthand that chord and just call it a C2. So you just take the C and you add the 2. So what happens when you see a chord that says C9? Now, if you look at your scale sheet and you count, if we count C, D, there's your 2, E, F, G, A, B is 7, and then we start over, C, that's 8, octave is your 8, oct for 8, and we keep going. D is also the 9. So D serves as a 2 and a 9. That's interesting, right? So why would we sometimes refer to the D in a chord as a 2 and sometimes refer to it as a 9? This is the point at which a lot of students like to guess, because at this point they think they have an answer. Do you think you have an answer? A lot of people are like, oh, I know, and they're very sure. And the funny thing is, the answer that they come up with, I know the answer that they think they have, and it sure seems logical. No one's actually had the right answer. But the answer that they think they have is so, and I always want to be able to say, wow, I wish it were correct. What they think it means is that you put the D in the next octave. Because that would make a lot of sense, wouldn't it? But it's not the case, unfortunately. It's just a way of abbreviating what the arranger wants you to do. What the arranger wants you to do, and it really makes no sense at all. The arranger wants you to add the 9th or the 2 and the 7th. It's just a shorthand. It's just a code almost. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, I'm asking for the 9 because I also want you to put the 7th in. That's all it means. There would be no way of guessing that. Okay, so you would simply add the 7th and the 9th, or the 2, whatever. You could put it here if you want. So that's a 9th chord. It's a very commonly used chord. So we're not into extraneous territory right now. We're actually in pretty straightforward territory still, because you're going to find it a lot. Here's some more confusing stuff for you. If you see C major 9th, do you remember C major 7th? The major refers to the 7. Well, guess what? The major is still referring to the 7th, and the major is still referring to the 7th in this C major 9th chord. In chord naming world, major is always going to refer to the 7th. Remember that in a 9th chord, the 7th is always included. It's another implied thing, that if you call for a 9th and not a 2, that the arranger is telling you, I want the 7th. It's just another way of asking for it. The arranger wants the 2 and the 7. And if they call for a major 9th, the word major in this chord is not referring to the 9th, because there's only one kind of 9th. It's or 2, whatever you want to say. So you are adding the major 7th and the 2 at the same time. That's a C major 9th. Here's just a plain old C9 with the flatted 7th. And it's all on your sheet. I mean, it's all laid out here. And if we were to continue forward here, and this may be a lot for one video, but of course you could decide to not move forward and just like stop the video here and save it for another time. But we can take it a little bit. We could just stop at the 11th chord. There's the same kind of principle here. In an 11th chord, you add the root, the 3rd, the 5th, the flatted 7th, the 9th, and the 4th, which is also the same as the 11th if we do the math. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You just count your way. 4 and 11th are the same. So, and again, the same principle. Why did we use 11 and not 4? We used 11 because the arranger is wanting you to include the 9th and the 7th. Same with a 13 chord. The arranger wants you to now add the 9th and the 7th. Technically, the 11th as well. It's supposed to be all odd numbers underneath the highest number. The truth of the matter is, if you played that chord as specified, like a 13 chord, that would expect you to have the root, the 3rd, the 5th, the 7th, the 9th, the 11th, and the 13th, you might as well just do this. And it sounds bad. I mean, it's a bad sounding chord. But in theory, this is what you're supposed to do. But you could ask any musician, and they will tell you that it's a cluttered sound. And what normally would happen if you legit need a 13 chord, you would pick and choose. You would clean up the chord to your specification. And more likely, in more cases than not, what you would end up doing is you would have the 13, which, by the way, is the 6th, and you would probably use the 6th and the 7th. You would use the 6th, the 7th, maybe the 9th, and then your triad, your root, your 3rd, and the 5th. But this is where you get into subjective territory. This is where you kind of do a judgment call, where you play the chord, and if you play it and it just doesn't quite strike your fancy, you would do some alteration to bring it to your personal liking. So there it is. That is the world of chords, and you will get better at it as you go. The video, you'll when you feel like sitting through this again, which may be a long time from now because it's a lot to digest. Um, just watch it through, and these sheets are the thing that are going to be your go-to.
Wonderful. Well,
Seem good?
thank you very much.
You got it.
Definitely